I'm Kirsty Henderson. I grew up in Glasgow. I went to the Rennie Mackintosh School of Architecture, where I studied to become an architect. And that was a 7-year course, all in all. I think I took 8 years because I took a year out in the middle of it. And for the final year of that, I moved to London. And one of the reasons for moving down was really to have an opportunity to get into the job market. And the schools in London were very sort of adapted for that. So I did my final year in London, and then I began to work as an architect. And I worked in construction for 12 years. And during that time, shortly after I left university, I started to train in martial arts. And that was really through somebody that introduced me at work to a Japanese-based fight school that was located in London. It was pretty unheard of and quite a brutal style, but I became hooked, and I ended up training up, became a fighter for the British team, ended up competing and then going to Japan, where I undertook 2 black belts and got ranked as the top female in the world. And that was an amazing experience because I had the opportunity to train or be the student of Kancho Yoshiji Sueno, who is one of Masayama's top students and the founder of Shidokan. So that was quite an incredible experience. And when returning from Japan, I was asked to coach other people. So I soon became the coach to the British men's team, and I trained them for World Championship wins in Sri Lanka and for the All Japan World Championships. So that was really successful and really enjoyable. Really enjoyed being a coach and also, taking people to wins, which is quite an exceptional experience. And then shortly after that, I was still building at this time. At that point, I was building a huge hospital in Wakefield. So we were on a £350 million project whilst I was flying backwards and forwards to Japan to fight people. When I got back, I was still working really heavily in architecture. I was headhunted by another firm to be director of it. But this was simultaneous with being asked more and more and more to coach. And by this point, I had set up what we call the London Women's Unit. And that was quite unique at its time. It was an underground fight training and defence unit for women in the city, and it was discreet. So it was non-disclosed addresses with high security locations, which allowed people to come in for discreet training. And we helped people from lots of different religions and women who had perhaps been slightly concerned about telling other people that they may be training up skills that they needed for their life. And that continued on for a few years. But during that work, more and more people were asking me for defence training, which I didn't feel that I had the skills for. Because one learns to fight, it's a very different thing from learning to defend. And so I started to train in Israeli Krav Maga, subsequently became a Krav Maga instructor, then became a QAP instructor, self-defense instructor, personal safety advisor, did another black belt. So this was all going on. And then, parallel to that, I had to make decisions about my profession, because I'd been offered a directorship by another firm, and also the firm that I had been at was offering me a directorship to keep me there. And I ended up just walking away from all of those offers and took the decision to set up a school where I could teach and develop, my thinking, and that's what I do today. So I now have my own fight schools. And I've also set up a defence and security unit called Personal Safety London, it's all very busy at the moment.
Brilliant. So let's introduce people to Shidokan Karate. For those who don't know, can you just explain how brutal this sport is?
It's really brutal. I mean, I had trained in Muay Thai fighting in Glasgow. And, you know, there's the Muay Thai in Glasgow is exceptional. The schools there are brilliant. It's very tough. But when I came across Shidokan, it was just on another level. And there's no gloves. It's all bare knuckle. And, you know, you're lucky if you get to wear body protection. I used to sneak in my breastplate at any possible opportunity, but we would, you know, be taken to European training camps in France and told not to bring any protection with us. And you're literally just going home black and blue, you know.
It's remarkable, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people will think of karate or kickboxing or something like that, and they'll envisage the Olympics where people wear pads, head guards, you know, gloves, and they have to score points. You know, it's dangerous, but to win a fight in Shidokan karate, how do you do that?
You either knock the other person out, or you break ribs or other bones to the point where they can't fight you anymore. It's pretty much, you know, you're
very straightforward.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. There's no points. You're training to, you know, defend yourself from being taken out and to you know, finish the fight as quickly as possible. So it's an interesting experience because you're training up really, really hard, but also with the mindset that you just cannot allow somebody to take you down. Yeah.
At this point, I think we should just, if it's not too personal, just outline your vital stats. How tall are you?
I'm 5'2.5". I stressed the and a half.
makes all the difference.
My fighting weight was 52 kg. So I kind of go on either side of that. But this is an interesting one, especially as a fight. I'm an MMA coach now. I've got competitive MMA teams.
So that stands for mixed martial arts.
Yeah. And so much is on weight category. And, you know, it blows me away because we were brought up in an environment where weight didn't matter. And you were taught how to be the most efficient fighter that you could be as you are, as you as a human being. So nobody would say to me, "Oh, Kirsty, for this fight, I think you should put on 5 kg." You know, so I was fighting at 52 because that was my optimum weight for me. But invariably, everyone would be at least 15, 20, 30 kg more than me.
It's incredible. So tell us about going to Japan. So specifically, you obviously became a black belt. You became ranked number 1 in the world. And to do that, you had to do some quite extraordinary things.
Yes, I mean, there's a grading system that you have to go through, as with most martial arts. It goes from white belt to black belt. And in the training on the way to black belt, you're fundamentally being taught how to undertake endurance fights. And they start off like your first belt, you'll fight 3 men, then the next one you'll fight 5 men, then the next one's 7 men. So you're building up to your 10 man, which is your first black belt. But there's a whole load of other stuff that goes with it. So you might be doing a 10 man, but you'll be doing that during the day where you're doing another 5 hours of training on top of that. And that 10 man could happen at any point. However, when you do it in Japan, you're out there for maybe 10 days and you don't know when it's going to happen. So it can happen at any point. And, you know, the first one that I did, I remember being driven about a lot during that particular day. I didn't know it was going to happen. So you were just carrying your kit with you just in case. And you train really, really hard before you go, but you might be out there for a few days and you're not actually doing any fighting. And there's this constant anticipation. You're like, when's this thing going to happen? And it was one night we were driven into a forest and I said to the guy who was in the car with me, he was also lined up for this fight. I said, I think we might have to fight in a minute. And right enough, you know, I think this was like 10 o'clock at night, right enough. We were straight in and had to fight people. But so that was the first one. And then the second one, it was 14 man. But that was a really interesting trip because I had been working really hard in architecture and we'd had a submission. So I'd been training really hard for this particular fight, but then it coincided with, I think, a planning submission that we had to do. And I had to stay up for 2 or 3 nights before flying out to Tokyo to get it finished. And on top of that, I got the flu.
It's not great preparation.
No. So I flew out to Tokyo, you know, with the strepsils and everything on the plane, and a complete lack of sleep. But you just have to get on with it, you know? You just have to do it.
So to clarify for people, a 14-man or a 10-man or a 12-man fight basically means one man comes in, you fight, and when he's knocked out or when he is incapable of carrying on, the second guy just comes straight in, and then the same continues again and again and again.
Well, it's set for 3 minutes. So if you don't knock them out, they'll bring you in another fighter anyway for the rest of that 3 minutes. So there's no incentive to knock the other person out. You just have to withhold the fight for 3 minutes.
So every time it's a fresh person coming to fight
you.
It's
a fresh person, but every 3 minutes is coming in. And on the 14-man, I mean, I think the day started with cleaning the dojo with a face cloth for hours. You know, it was like something out of Karate Kid. You know, you're like, okay, so this is the deal. So there's a face cloth clean of the dojo.
And wasn't this dojo like up in the trees?
Well, this was another thing that was really interesting. So I had the absolute honor of staying at my grandmaster's dojo in Ito, which is amazing. So normally when I'm in Tokyo, I'm at the Hombu dojo, but for these black belts, I was down in Ito at his own dojo, and this is basically off the side of a volcano and these incredible eucalyptus trees. Wow. I mean, it's absolutely stunning. But a hurricane had come up the night before my grading, and I was staying in that place on my own. And it's funny because you think, we're not from a country that are used to these weather cycles. And I was so alarmed. I was like, this is just uncomfortable. I don't like being in a hurricane. So the night had been quite a strange experience because you do all this training, but at the end of the day, you know, you're not in control of nature. So by the time everybody turned up to fight me the next day, I was genuinely happy to see them. So that put a different tip on it. So they came in and we had to do a 5-kilometer race up the volcano.
Wow. As a warm-up.
But what I didn't realise was that when I got back from the 5-kilometer race, the second I was in the door, I would start fighting. And, you know, you don't know how many... I didn't know it was going to be 14. You don't know how many people you're going to fight, and you don't know when the fight's going to happen. So I remember, like, I'd given this 5K my full pelt, raced it and came back and was quite pleased with my result. And then went, oh no, that was really stupid. So I'd managed to get one gulp of water down, and then the gong starts, and they basically bang this gong, while you start fighting. And you literally, at one point, I think it was after the 4th or 5th person, I just thought, okay, maybe it's everyone in the room that I have to do. And you just have to kind of clock off and just deal with each one at a time.
That's incredible. So the fascinating thing about martial arts is that it's as much training the body as training the mind, isn't it? And what do you think you gain from going into a scenario like that and experiencing a scenario like that?
I think you gain a huge connection to yourself, because when you're in these situations, you're the only person that can get you out of it or through it. You know, you're not in a position to go, okay, I've had enough now. You know, things are being thrown at you. It's an unknown quantity. You're not sure when it's going to end or what the severity of it's going to be. So you have to have a level of personal certainty that you, somewhere deep inside, can dig deep enough to have the resolve to handle it. And I think that is one thing which is cross-transferable into everything. And I see that in business. I mean, sometimes you're just faced with situations where You've got so much to do, so many decisions to make. You know, things might not be going right. But you can be calm about it, because really, you know, I think it puts a lot of life into perspective, you know.
And do you have a greater self-belief, do you feel, as a result of doing these things?
It's interesting. Self-belief is something that, you know, believing in yourself, I prefer to think of it like self-knowing, knowing yourself. Because belief is something that I attach spiritually, you know, my belief in God. And if I know myself and believe in God, that double two together is the co-creation that makes it work, you know. And I think one of the most beautiful things that has come out of all the fight training is my spiritual connection, my spiritual understanding, and my want, you know, to learn more spiritually. So when I think of things like self-belief, I'm really, really aware that it's not just me doing this job. You know, I'm doing it in co-creation. So self-belief for me, you know, when you train in martial arts properly, you get your ego knocked out of you. You know, the whole thing is about being incredibly humble. And it's actually can be quite difficult to be self-congratulating at any point, you know, because they do such a good job on you.
Sure.
But the good thing about that is it opens up a door to be able to be more aware, I think, of what is assisting you. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And do you ever think about the balance between talent and effort when you look at all that you've achieved in, say, martial arts? Do you have any strong views on talent or effort?
Well, it's interesting. I suppose my views are probably developing on that, and they will likely develop in the future further, because I'm now a teacher as well as a student. You know, I'm very, very lucky. I'm a student at the moment of another of Masayama's top fighters, and it's an amazing experience to be, and plus I've just recently done my yoga teacher training. So I'm in lots of different situations where I'm a student. And in that case, I suppose you naturally are looking, when you're learning, to, am I a natural in this, or am I having to work hard, you know? But as a teacher, I can see when people coming into my schools and into Five Rings, no, I think with the right programming and the right coaching, you can pretty much bring anybody up to high level. They need to want to do it. So I think really it's about passion. If you can tap into someone's passion, or find a passion of someone that you can use as a vehicle for their development, then you can bring them up. I'm not a big believer that there are some people on the planet who are more capable than others. I think a lot of it has to do with education, opportunity, and programming.
That's great insights. And what are your thoughts on taking risks? You know, you've mentioned about this is something that you would potentially do in not only a professional sense through fighting, but also in a business sense. Do you sort of experience fear? How often do you take risks?
I think I've got into the habit of taking risks regularly. I think I have definitely seen moments where I haven't taken risks. Like if I have a period of time, it tends to coincide if my energy's low. So if I'm overworked or my system's out of balance, then I'm less likely to take risks. And on a larger scale of looking at it, you could say basically when my human system is not at its peak, when it's not performing at all levels, fear can come in quicker. You know, but when you are in balance and, you know, your nutrition's going well, your training's going well, you're alert, you're focused, when your system's functioning, you're more capable of taking risks because you have your equipment.
Yeah.
You know, so the fear thing has a lot to do with mindset, and mindset has a lot to do with your condition of your state.
Okay. That's very interesting. So talking about preparing and nutrition and being in an optimal state, for you personally, what's the best nutrition before a fight in an ideal world, or while you are training?
Oh gosh.
What's your favourite scenario
Tons of food.
to fuel it?
tons of food. I mean, it's always been porridge in the morning and loads of fish and brown rice and vegetables. And there was always a joke about me with fights and gradings and what have you, that I always have a rack of lamb the day before.
Okay.
It just makes me springy. I don't know what it is. But yeah, I mean, I tend to eat 5 meals a day. And drink lots of water. The key thing when you're training for those kind of fights, you have to have every single thing programmed.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and especially if you're holding down a full-time job at the same time. So, for example, before that trip for the 14-man, I was running a 5K at breakfast, a 5K at lunch, and a 5K at dinner, and then eating around that. Lots of Tupperware, lots of food prep. You have to prep all your food and be really, but really regimented. So, you know, I know most of us do this now, especially if you're running projects or running your business or what have you. But, you know, it's the night before you program the next day, and everything's down to the last half hour of what you're doing and when.
When we talked before, you said something really powerful, which was, when you're preparing to fight, I think about what I eat, how I walk, how I talk, how I think. And I thought that was really powerful. And I wondered if you could just sort of say a bit more about that. It's
just everything that you do, everything you consume, every way that you think, everything you move is for the fight. It's 100% programming. So it's very selfish. It's a difficult thing to do when you've got other people sharing your space or your life. You literally just have to be so disciplined, and it's all you're thinking about all the time. And that's an interesting one, because the mindset that you get from that actually makes you really good at your job. So it's not like you're going to work and you're not thinking about the fight, but it's a mental positioning where I suppose the best way to explain it is you're not allowing outside factors to sway you or interfere in any way. It's just pure focus. It's an amazing experience to have. Not everybody is in a position to have that luxury. So it's definitely, the times when I have done that in my life, I've been very grateful for those opportunities.
When you are faced with different scenarios, can you tell us how you react when things go badly and how you react when things go well?
I think when things go badly, I react differently now than I used to. I'm very aware of that. I'm much calmer now. Maybe that's an age thing. When things go badly, I tend to take time to sit down and examine, you know, at what point did things start to go astray? From the training that I've been doing and the work that I do, we use an awareness of energy so much, you know, so it's unusual for something to go drastically wrong without us having, you know, some understanding that this was going to happen, you know, or that something's off key. So the first port of call would be to sit down and assess, why did it happen and at what point did things start to go wrong? And then the next thing would be to gather as much information as possible and look at the options of how to correct it, you know, if that's the options. And the key, I mean, we actually had a situation like this a couple of weeks ago at Five Rings training where we had something go quite drastically wrong. And it was down to a mismanagement of communication, which often in life, a lot of problems are down to lack of communication. Yes. But it was really interesting because it was something that affected so many people at an emotive level. A lot of people were faced with losing out on something, about things that they really cared about. So the protocol really was to sit down and get everybody involved together and look at, okay, at what point did it go wrong? And what was good about the whole thing is there's no emotion, you know. There's no one's allowed to point blame. It's just, we just need to understand the facts, and then we need to look at what the options are. And if we're able to make a correction, then that's great. If we're not, then, you know, we move on to another solution and just trust that that's possibly the better path for us, you know. But if it's things which are that one can't strategize and manage and handle, then I pray. Yeah. You know, so yeah, lots and lots of praying going on. And, you know, and also if it affects you emotionally, I'm a big believer in getting rid of the emotion quickly, you know, just get it out, whether that's go up the hills for a run, cry, you know, put music on, sing, whatever it is. You know, I don't believe in holding emotion within the body. So that's really if things go the wrong way. If they go the right way, yeah, I mean, I think again, it's just give thanks for it, be grateful, and yeah, I mean, just feel blessed.
Let's talk about motivation. What motivates you personally?
Oh gosh. So I think when I was younger, my motivation was different.
Sure, yeah.
There was definite drive, and I think when you're younger, you're more conditioned within a social sense, you know, about careers and money and, you know, like, I mean, I grew up in an environment in a school where one was expected to become a profession. Yeah. Yeah. So lawyer, doctor, architect, la-di-la. So I think when I started architecture, and highly competitive, I mean, I'm highly competitive anyway. So I always play these kind of little games with myself, like, okay, I'm going to be an architect, but I'm going to be a director of a really big firm as well.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, there's something kind of childish in that, because I can feel myself go, let's tick that box, you know? So that can be a motivator, and probably was before. And then with the fighting, I think there's an element of that, just going, you know, how good can we get? But actually, as I get older, that motivation's changed completely to a much more, you know, what can I do to fulfill my spiritual path? Am I doing enough to be who I can be? Those kind of things. Yeah. So a little different.
Sounds good. And when are you happiest?
When I'm fighting.
Okay.
I mean, I was training on last week. I was training at a particularly tough session, and I'm really lucky at the moment. I have an amazing teacher, and I have men who are exceptional fighters, excuse me, working with me and really taking me up to the next level. And I came out of that session pretty badly bruised, and completely elated.
Really?
Yeah. And I was thinking about it afterwards, you know, where does this pure joy come from?
Yeah.
You know, because it's not. Lots of people think fighting in martial arts is all about aggression, and people that fight must be, you know, leaning towards violence and all of these things. And it's so untrue, because it's actually about having no emotion.
Yes.
And the elation comes from pure connection with yourself.
What's the Japanese word for that? No mind?
Mushin.
Mushin.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So the state of mushin is basically something that most martial artists try all their lives to acquire. And some people do and some people don't. And I've had it twice that I could say that was definitely mushin. And it's just when everything comes into sync. It's just a level of awareness and connection that, I mean, you can't have that experience and not become very spiritual / religious, you know?
So over decades of fighting, you've had it twice.
I've had it
That's amazing.
Twice, and they probably lasted 30 seconds. Wow. I mean, I think you've got to be honest with yourself about, you know, how... I think people feel that they're really in sync sometimes when they're fighting, but to actually get into mushin, I think you've got to be quite honest with yourself. Like, when did you really feel it? But you know when you feel it, because it's so surprising. It's so, you really like, whoa.
Okay.
Yeah, it's epic.
Do you think you're lucky?
I don't really believe in luck. I think I'm blessed. I don't think... I mean, I'm highly aware of how hard I've worked. And I certainly don't have an easy ride of it. I definitely have a lot of obstacles and difficulties thrown at me. And I've always had that in my life path. I would like to think that that's going to become slightly more chilled out. But so in terms of luck, I've never felt lucky. And as I've developed my own spiritual understanding, then no, I don't believe in luck. I believe in blessings.
You do, through the course of our conversation, refer to being grateful already. So one of the other questions I was asking is, how often do you think about gratitude? But I guess the answer to that is quite a lot. A
lot, probably most days, every day. I mean, I bless all my food. So when I eat and drink, I bless and say thanks. And I mean, I'm constantly just chatting away to God, to be perfectly honest with you. So there's a lot of that is probably whinging and a lot of it's being thankful. You've got to have a balance. You've got to be realistic about how you're feeling. If you're not feeling good about stuff, I think you have to be realistic about that. And when you have something good, you have to be aware of the fact that that's awesome.
Yeah.
You know.
And do you think very much about the passing of time? Do you think do you reflect more on the past? Do you look forward more to the future? Is there any kind of imbalance?
I think I'm very analytical, so I have to be careful. I don't naturally look at the past too much. I've got a very analytical mind, so it would make sense to me to derive principles from past experiences and then try to apply them to the present and future. I definitely goal set, so I very often think about what's happening next. But when it comes to the present, I would say one of the things I'd like to straighten out is I constantly feel like I'm wasting time, like I'm not getting things done,
or that you could do more.
Yeah, especially when it comes to fulfilling my capabilities. Yeah. And you have to be careful with that, because if you do that too often, you're not giving yourself time to do it.
Yeah.
you know? So, I mean, I think everyone throughout their life at every point is still learning, still developing. So one of the things I have learned to do, I would say in this last year, is take much more ritualistic time out to create pauses.
Yes.
And I've reduced the number of hours that I actually work, but I've upped my productivity. Okay. And that is something that I think lots of people struggle with, because when you're brought up in a corporate environment where being in the office 8 o'clock in the morning till 7, 8 at night is the done thing, and then you have your own business, first of all, you leave the corporate environment because you don't want to work like that, but then it takes years to get out of that cycle, because you feel guilty if you're not. And everyone I talk to has the same thing, So it's only this last year that I have kind of patted myself in the back and just go, do you know what? When you do work, you work jolly hard. So, and you can't keep this pace up if you don't take more well-being time. So
so there's kind of periods of intense effort, and then there's obviously got to be times for recovery.
Yes, and I think it's that for every hour of intense effort, I'm now understanding there needs to be an hour of meditation or yoga or Kiko or something which fills my energetic system, because I teach a lot, and teaching is very giving. Yeah. As every teacher out there will know, if you're not replenishing the energy that you're giving, you're not serving anybody, least of all yourself.
And you can't keep going back to the well.
Well, I mean, you have to find ways to, you have to find ways to keep that energy building. You can't just run it dry and then expect it to appear from nowhere. Yeah. So, but oddly, it's taken this long for me to get out of that corporate mindset. But then I suppose if you're in there for 12 years, it's going to take a while to get out. It's quite a bit of
conditioning, isn't it? I'm not always brave enough to ask people this question, but I feel like I can ask you because you're sort of tough enough to deal with it, which is, how often do you think about your own mortality?
Well, I don't. I really don't. I think, I mean, I really have a strong feeling I've got about 40 years left. I've really kind of connected to that. Yeah. Some part of me must think that, yeah, that's when it's going to end, which is fine as long as I, do what I need to do. But I don't think of mortality because I have a firm belief of life, like the eternity of the soul, So my spiritual beliefs kind of diminish any concerns about mortality, if that makes sense.
And can we talk about mindset?
Yes.
How would you describe the mindset that you adopt?
Focused.
Okay.
Really, really focused. I think the key thing is, I think we've talked about this before, but goal setting is so important. If there's times where I haven't set goals, my mindset just goes all over the place. And I'm really childish and creative mentally.
Yeah.
So that can just lead to a whole load of nonsense, and it can start my imagination, just going off. So, if I think the most important thing for most people is I think each person needs to understand what mindset works for them. If you want to be in a highly creative environment, doing something massively creative, then that's the way to go. So, for example, right now, we're sitting in this art studio and this particular project. I can't set goals on that one because it needs to come out of me in this creative, childlike way, So that's an area where I have to allow that. But if I go into my business, for example, and don't apply goal setting focus, then things just don't happen.
Yeah.
So I think, it's just whenever I can take what I've learned from my training in martial arts and apply it to my work, it works.
Yeah. One question I ask everyone is, do you think the mindset you adopt is a choice?
Yes. But you can't make that choice if you haven't been educated.
Yeah. That is probably the best answer I've had for that question.
I can't stress this enough. And as a teacher, and we run so many research programs on pedagogies and human behaviors and what have you. If somebody is lacking in awareness, they're basically very quickly a victim of their emotions. And emotions are picked up from your environmental, conditioning, your social conditioning. You can pick them up directly from other people. They might not even be your emotions, hereditary programming, all of these things. And also, one of the things that I see a lot of is when people lack information, it creates confusion. And confusion directly is, I'm a firm believer of this, that confusion is one of the main drives for violence.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So the key things, if you can, I'm very, very lucky in the sense that, or blessed, but when I say lucky in that I'm saying I don't believe in luck, and I really don't, but most people would look at me and think, yeah, she's lucky because she's able to dissect each of these different scenarios and what have you. I've got awareness from my training, and I've got lots of education. I've got tons of different qualifications, and I've got a mind which observes and, assesses. And then if I don't understand something, I'll go and find out more about it. Not everybody is in that mindset.
Yeah.
So as a result, if I do get upset about something, I'm able to take it away and understand it, and to make a choice about how I'm going to think or approach a situation. Yeah, I have tools and skills. You can give those tools and skills to anybody, but not everyone just has them. Yeah.
Do you have any belief systems? So, and when I say that, that's a very broad term, because For some people it's spiritual. Obviously, we've touched on this already, but it could be philosophical, religious. It can be non-religious. It can be anything.
Yeah, I mean, I find it difficult to talk about belief systems outside a spiritual religious context, because to me then they would be values or morals.
Okay, yes, that's a good differentiation.
Yeah, from a belief system, I've studied so much theology through my training. So when I started to train in martial arts, I naturally studied the religions of China and Japan and all the politics and the history and everything that goes with it. Because when you're training to fight, you want to understand where the fighting comes from. Where do these styles come from? And so for a long time, I studied Taoism for about 7 years. I mean, I was brought up in a Scottish Protestant church community. And I think I probably got quite a lot of values from that. So that's all about, how you behave towards others and being respectable and caring and what have you. But then the Taoism brought to me this kind of magical realm, and started to make sense of some of the connections that I was feeling whilst I was fight training.
And for people that don't know, and it's not an easy task, but can you just sort of explain Taoism?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much what you learn through it is your connection to nature. The pattern and rhythms of things. That there's a rise and fall, ebb and flow of life. There's a way, a way of things. And when you're training in Japan, so much is on the way, and the words "the way" just keep coming up, throughout all your training. And it's kind of ethereal and untangible.
It's very hard to define the way, isn't it?
So you almost have to find the way for you.
Exactly.
So there was aspects of this which I, thought were incredible, but also quite monastic. Yeah. And that's a difficult way to live. I mean, if you can go off and train in dojos in Japan by yourself, that's brilliant, but you have to come back and engage with society at some point. So when I came back and I started training in Israeli Krav Maga, I naturally did the same procedure of reading about the religion, the politics and the history of Israel in the same way. And I picked up this is quite a funny story actually, because I picked up this book called the Talmud, right? And I had no idea what it was, but I was looking for a book written by the rabbinical sages, because I'd read about the Chinese sages, So it was it was like, obviously, well, let's go to this let's go to a different group of sages, And I was on a train going up to Scotland, and I had this book on the table, and this gentleman was checking my ticket, and he turned out to be Jewish, and he looked at the book and was like, I just remember his face, he was just like, huh? Here's me sitting in my ripped jeans and thumbing through this book, and he said something to me in Hebrew, and at the time none of it made any sense to me, and it wasn't until I ended up embracing Judaism and wanting to convert, and it wasn't until I started to go down the conversion route that I realised that this book, the Talmud, was actually, one of the key books for rabbinical, study. And but I mean, to cut the long story short, what I found in Judaism was this connection that it pinned so much of the things from Taoism. It just brought them into a more tangible way of living your life. And it, in a nutshell, weaves the spiritual to the physical, which is what all my training has been about. So it's just, the more I was reading, the more it was like, this makes total sense to me.
The thing I find fascinating about Taoism is that quite a lot of religion can be quite prescriptive, and I think the most amazing thing about Taoism is that essentially it says it's up to you. It basically provides this framework, and then it says, here's, to use an architectural analogy,
Yes.
it says, here's the base and the frame for the building, and you now have to go and fill it in yourself.
Yes, it does. And that's, I think, good in a sort of developmental route. That, for me, I can't speak for others,
Sure.
but in my opinion, for me. But what was missing was my understanding of God.
Yeah.
And when reading the Torah, I started to understand who God is and what God is. And this was interesting because through that, I started to understand myself more, So, I mean, that's going into a much more deeper conversation on religion. But I would say having that transition, and it's quite funny that it was through fighting in Krav Maga that got me there. I've definitely found a belief system for me that is just a whole load of light bulb moments going off, going, no way, I can't believe this. Really? It all just keeps making sense. Whereas in Taoism, this concept of God was just not there.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite questions because we get such interesting answers. What's been your biggest mistake?
Oh, gosh. It's a really difficult one to think about mistakes because to a certain extent you have to look at everything's happened to get, to where you are now. I think you can look back and go, I wish I hadn't had to go through that or this, but really you can't peel it apart from the weave of your life, because I don't honestly sit and think, oh gosh, that I did such and such and that was a real, I wish I could go back and change it. I don't know. I often think about when I was younger because I started off earlier wanting to be an artist and a psychopathologist.
Okay.
And I ended up going on this very long route through architecture into training, which is now, I now have an institute which is all about human behaviours. Yeah. So sometimes I think, was that a crossroads?
Yeah.
And or did we have to go that full circle? I don't know enough about the plan of my life to be able to say what was a mistake or what was a correct move, to be honest with you.
Okay, let's ask some final questions. What's the hardest thing you've ever done? What are you most proud of?
Hardest thing, I think we've talked about this before, and I find this really fascinating. I think the hardest thing is losing somebody you love.
Yeah.
I really do, because you can go around increasing your awareness, increasing your skill sets, your tools and what have you, and learning how to manage and strategize. But with that, something's just taken away from you and love's involved, then you have to have acceptance. And acceptance is just something that's so difficult to, it's almost like a counter experience to all of the doing.
Yes.
It's like
a passive.
It's like a yin energy as opposed to so much of what we do, especially in the West, is very yang energy. And the acceptance is the very, you're right, passive and receptive. So you just have to allow. And I think learning how to allow and have acceptance has been the hardest part in my lifetime for me. Patience would be the second one. I'm not very patient. I've had to learn how to be much more patient. But yeah, acceptance.
What would you say to your 18-year-old self?
I think there's two halves. I think for the first half of my life, I would have said, really harden up because it's going to be tough, And yeah, I mean, I think that would have been the just really get yourself together and get ready. And then for the second half, I would say, as I'm just starting it out, I'm guessing this one, but I would say breathe and believe.
Like that. Tell me one book everyone should read.
Oh, this is so difficult.
Or I can be generous and allow you two.
Well, I don't. The book that I am absolutely transfixed on is the Sefer Yetzirah, and I've been reading it for years, and I'm still reading it. But I don't think that's a book that everybody should read. That's just my one thing. The book that I recommend the most. Oh, actually, there's two for people that are setting up their businesses. Start your business week by week and the 4-hour work week.
Okay.
Get the two of those, and you will nail it.
Is there a popular belief or something you see a lot of people doing that you disagree with?
Yeah, The Secret. Oh my goodness. The Secret, the law of attraction thing.
Yeah.
I think it's really damaging because there's so many people. I work with such a huge cross spectrum of people. I'm very.
So, sorry, just to clarify. So this is a book which is called The Secret, which outlines the law of attraction. Basically, people effectively getting what they deserve is a crude summary of it.
Yeah, or they think they get what they think about.
Yes.
Yeah. But the problem that I see is, it's not a criticism of the book itself. It's a criticism of the way that people utilize it. There's this concept flying about at the moment in a kind of pop psychology of the law of attraction, that if you want something and you think about it enough, it comes into your life. But there's no onus on action.
Yes.
And we are given thought, speech, and action as our three, major tools in our existence. And we need to be using those. So yes, thoughts are correctly a very powerful tool, and what you think about, that's important. They carry energy, but you have to act. You have to do stuff. So when I'm teaching, there's so much focus on what are we as human beings doing in order to make things happen. And, there's this saying, if you move, heaven moves with you. I'm a firm believer of that, but you have to move.
Yes. Yeah.
So my advice to people on that would be like, establish what you want, because that's part of the problem. A lot of people don't know what they want. But establish what you want, but then understand that you do actually have to do the work as well, Okay.
Very last question. Who or what inspires you?
Music inspires me.
Let's go for it. What's the top 3?
Oh gosh. Well, I listen to a lot of classical music.
Yeah. Okay.
At the moment, I'm really listening to a lot of Japanese music. It really depends on what I'm wanting to produce. If I want to connect into my training, then I tend to go for Japanese, Chinese. And that seems obvious, but I know lots of people put on kind of fast-paced house music to train to, but that doesn't work for me. I need to actually get the cultural connection. But yeah, music really, really does it for me, and I forget that sometimes. So it's one of the things I have to remember, that when I need a bit of inspiration to. But then I spend a lot of time with nature, which I find really useful.
Brilliant. That is a perfect way to end it.
Thanks
very much.
No,
Kirsty.
thank you.